Orl David, Adonai mi Yahur Lecha, mi Yishkon Behar Katshecha, Olech Kamim Fuel Sedek, the Dover Meskel Babo, Regala, Shonolo, Solari Eura of Herpolo Masak Babo, Nimzebe Nabni Mas, Besiriad Mechabe, Nishpala Rabelo Yamir, Kaspolo Nosam Neshet, Shochad Al Makilo Makach, Ose Ela Limo Yolam. But I guess Rabbi Tabalavsky to lead us in the parak of the Hilm.
Mizmor David, Adonai Roi, Lo Yachsar. Pinot Sheyar Bitzeini, Ame Menuchot Inaleini. Nafshi Shovev Yalchini B'maglei Tzedek Leman Shemo. Gam Ki Eilech B'Geitz HaMavet, Lo Yirara Ki Ata Imadi. Shivtecha Mishamdecha Hima Yinachamuni. Taroch Lifanai Shulchan Neged Tzorrai. Shamta B'Shem Roshi Kosire Bayai. Achto B'Chesed Yedefuni Ko Yemei Chayai. V'shavti B'Beit Adonai Le'orech Yamim.
Let's say one more thing before we get started with words of remembrance. That is, Mrs. Stern was definitely an Eshet Chayil. We'll just say the verses of Eshet Chayil. Eshet Chayil mi yimtza v'rachot mipni nim nichra. Batach ba leiv bala v'shalol lo yachsar. K'molasu tov v'lo ra kol yimei chayeha. Darshat semer ufishtim batas b'chefetz kapeha. Hoisa kaniyos socher mi merchak tavilach ma. Batakam biod laila v'titin terefel v'yisav v'chokler aroseha. Zalmima sodevati gacheyu mipricha peah natakarem. Kagravi os mosnea v'ate ameitz reoseha. To'amel ki tov sakra lo yichvev alayla neira. Yodea shulchava kishor v'chapea tam kufalech. Kappa parsa lo ani v'yodea shulchala evyon. Lo siral v'yisam mishaleh ki chol v'yisal lahu shamim. Marvadim Masasala Sheish Yargamon Busha Noda Bashiarim Bala Bashiptoim Zikne Aretz Sadin Asasava Tinkor Vachagor Nasnala Knani Oz Vihadar Busha Vatischak Liomacharo Pia Pascha Bachachma Vasoras Chesed Al Shomra Sophia Lichos Besa Valechem Atzlus Lo Sochel Kamu Vaneva Yashrua Bala Vayahalala Rabos Banos Asu Chayil Viatolis Al Kulana Shekarachain Behebel Yofi Isha Yiras Adonai Hisis Halal Tnulam Priyadeha Vihalua Basharim Maseha. The parsha of the week is Parshas Akev, and Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, Akev Tishma'un. If you listen to the mitzvos of Hashem, God will bring you reward. And the word Akev is normally translated as an exchange for, but there's a very famous medrash cited by Rashi that Akev is related to Akev, which is the heel. And if there are mitzvos that people normally are dash ba'kava, people normally just sort of tread upon, don't take seriously, if you take those mitzvos seriously, then you're really, really showing that you're taking God's commandments seriously. That, of course, is true for devotion to mitzvos. I think it's true for human interaction as well. That all of us, thank God, every now and then you have a person who's fundamentally a rude person, but most of us are not rude people. Most of us are kind, good-hearted people. Say what's appropriate in etiquette, say hello there, a kind word here. And yet, there are so many interactions that so many of us don't value. Don't place a premium on. And I think if we're going to reflect for a few moments about this wonderful, wonderful human being, Mrs. Sue Stern, Sarabas Pesach Leib, I think it's fair to say that in her human interactions, she never tread lightly on anyone or anything. And she valued every opportunity. I'll share with you, I once I once heard an interesting Torah. Forgive me, I don't remember the parties in this. So someone said, sometimes it's hard to be kind to everyone. But you know how you can deal with it? Imagine that every person is an esrog on Sukkos. No one would ignore an esrog on Sukkos. Everyone would take an esrog seriously. Treat every person like they're a mitzvah coming your way. Okay, fine. Someone shared this Torah with the prominent rabbi. Again, forgive me for not remembering whom. He said, nice thought. He says, I have no idea why you need to say that. The human being that you interact with is a Tzelem Elokim, is a likeness of God. And I don't know why in the world you need a Torah to tell you to treat everyone with respect. And I think it's fair to say that that's a description of Mrs. Stern's interactions with people, that she saw the godliness in every single person. Family members told me the most beautiful things. I just want to share some of them. She made impactful contact wherever she went. The Sterns lived in different places, and she was the type of person who, wherever she went, she made meaningful connections. She was the type of person who never met a stranger. Really liked that one. She certainly was a person who judged people for the good. Just in the room before, I hope I get the story correctly, but you told me, Judy, her daughter Judy, told me that in the nursing home in which Mrs. Stern was, at the end, the director of the nursing home told her that she had a dream about Mrs. Stern, I guess the night she passed away. And the dream was that she went up to each and every resident and worker at the home and hugged them and said thank you. That's the impression she made on another person, that that's who she was. She was a preschool teacher, and she very much embraced and enjoyed the opportunity. There are people, I'm not saying I'm one of them, but there are people who say that preschool, that's glorified babysitting. So Mrs. Stern was ecstatic that she could be the first teacher these children would ever have. She could introduce them to this life, to this sort of mini society in its own, of school and teachers and students. I think the way she interacted with people was not only special, but I think the way she thought those interactions was very special. So, unfortunately, she lost a daughter during her life. And it happens to be, my wife years ago gave a women's shiur in the Northwood area, and Mrs. Stern was a regular attendee at the shiur. And if I believe I'm getting the story correctly, the Shabbos before her daughter passed away, my wife happened to be giving a shiur, and there was some thought that my wife shared that Mrs. Stern felt was very meaningful when thinking about her daughter. Okay, fine. Whenever I would interact with Mrs. Stern over the years, many, many years since then, first of all, Mrs. Stern without fail would ask how my wife was. That's just the type of person she was. Mrs. Stern then would go on to tell me how wonderful of a teacher my wife was, how much she enjoyed connecting with my wife. And then Mrs. Stern would talk about that moment in that Shabbos afternoon shiur, the Shabbos before her daughter passed away, and she was so grateful to my wife for giving her that opportunity. And I just want to reflect on this for a moment. Not only did she remember, not only did she share of herself in that way quite freely, that she was happy to share of herself if that was a way to show respect and regard to another person, but those kind of moments are the type of things that many people don't want to dwell on and don't want to come back to. But if there was a connection that she had with a person, it was well worth it. It was well worth it to visit and visit and visit again and again, because that was a bond with the person. Judy mentioned to me that she was born the same day as Anne Frank. The same date. There's not, and she would reflect on how fortunate she was, how different her life could have been if born in a different place. And look at all the things she experienced in her life. What a beautiful perspective of being in this world. But if we're going to talk about Mrs. Stern, we're going to talk about her human interactions. Her family was vital to her, but her marriage was a very unique one and a very special one. Judy shared with me that her parents met in, Mrs. and Dr. Stern met in 8th grade, and they were together ever since. What a beautiful thing when the way Judy said it is, when you thought of one, you always thought of the other. And I used to find them a fascinating couple, because at least from my vantage point, I mean, Mrs. Stern, this is not from my vantage point, this is obvious. Mrs. Stern was so outgoing and so warm. And Dr. Stern was always very kind, but was a little bit more reserved and more I thought of him more of as an intellectual than an emotional. And they made such a lovely couple. It was so beautiful to see them. And we're very sorry to be parting with her. But the idea of them being reunited in Shomrai is a meaningful thing to think about. But I just want to say one more thing, which Judy shared with me, which is that Mrs. Stern used to regularly give Judy a bracha on Friday. And even in these last years, when obviously her mental faculties clearly had declined, she would give her a bracha, occasionally in person, but most of the time by phone, every Friday until just last Friday. What a beautiful thing to think about. And that idea of whatever else, by the way, I think you told me there was a recent time where you asked for a bracha, maybe you said it slightly different than you normally do, and it threw her off a little bit, so she didn't give you the Friday night bracha, she started saying Kiddush instead. But of course, when a person doesn't have all of their mental faculties, it's such a painful thing to see, but it's such a remarkably beautiful thing to think about when they don't have their normal inhibitions and they don't have the normal understandings of what people do expect and what people don't expect. You see them, who they really, really are. And with all the thank yous and with all the warmth to other people, that's who she really, really was. And a loving mother, and of course, grandmother, who saw her family as being the next chain in tradition of the nation of God. It all comes together in such a beautiful way, thinking about giving that bracha on Fridays. And my hope is that her family should have much consolation not having her with them anymore, but they should have many wonderful memories, and they should always be able to bring forward to future generations this unique spirit, appreciating every person and every opportunity for everything that God brings us. Would like to share words of eulogy from Yitzhak Zimmerman, otherwise known in this community as Ira Zimmerman, very beloved, lives in Israel currently, a very beloved past member of our community who enjoyed a very special relationship with the Sterns. The first word that comes to mind is delightful. Sue Stern was simply a delightful person, kind, helpful, unpretentious, willing to listen, even-tempered, reluctant to judge others, friendly, community-spirited, and always ready to say thank you. How hard it is to bid farewell to a person like Sue, who shared her delightfulness with us during a lifetime blessed with long years. In early childhood, Sue, then Suzanne Cutler, lived with her parents and younger brother Gordon in Canada. One could sometimes catch Canadian pronunciations and expressions in her speech, such as the way she said the word about, sorry, I can't do it, and her occasional use of at the end of a sentence. Before Sue reached adulthood, the Cutler family moved to Brooklyn, New York, where Sue met Jay Stern at a Hebrew high school they both attended. Before their marriage, they corresponded in Hebrew when Jay traveled to Israel for study. After their engagement, the couple decided that a down payment on a house was a better investment than an expensive engagement ring. Sue was never one to request gifts or to pamper herself. Of course, Jay recognized this aspect of her character and did not let her go without gifts and a little pampering. When the Stern family spent a year in Israel in the 1960s, one of their ventures was a drive to Eilat. During that trip, while the family was walking past the shop, Sue noticed a painting in the window that she thought attractive. Jay said, "I'll be right back." And as one may anticipate, he returned from the shop a moment later with the painting in hand. It became her favorite item of wall decor, and it accompanied her to wherever she moved in life. Jay's career as a scholar and educator involved positions in Rochester, New York, Detroit, Michigan, and finally Montgomery County, Maryland in 1979. By this time, their children, Yehudit, Aviva, and David, were at the point of early adulthood. Jay gave Sue 3 ketubot. The first ketubah was handed to the beautiful young Kala of the chuppah. The second, Jay crafted using copper. He gave Sue a third ketubah after she admired the ketubah he made for the wedding of Yehudit and Dan Flags. After the wedding, Jay got to work on another one in the same style. How beautiful was Jay and Sue's marriage of more than 60 years. Following the example of Jay and Sue, all 3 of the Stern children married wonderful spouses and built marriages of the same unwavering commitment, mutual respect, and enduring love that Jay and Sue had for each other. Like their parents, the Stern children exhibited strong character. Among other favorable traits, Yehudit was practical and efficient. Aviva was empathetic and altruistic. David was decent and clever. It is probably more accurate to say that all 3 Stern children exhibited each of these attributes to one extent or another. The grandchildren, Shoshana, Leora, Ezra, Akiva, Eliana, Shira, and Moshe, are continuing along this path of virtue as surely as the great-grandchildren will. The family brand is Torah, Avodah, Milut Chasadim. One can see this in the way David's wife Judy and Yehudit, who lives in Albany, became a committee of 2 in recent times to meet Sue's needs as she walked on life's path. That Sue is even tempered and reluctant to judge others does not mean she was without strong opinions, or that she never found reason to criticize and correct others. If you truly care about others, you speak up, you try to keep them safe from error. If someone was in need of guidance, however uncomfortable listening to the guidance might have been, that person was fortunate. The guidance was delivered by someone with Sue's kindness and sincere desire to help. Sue's love of Israel found expression in various aspects of her life. On Tisha B'Av 2016, she wrote of her longing for Zion. Jay and I were not among the Giborim who were able to leave family and friends, and I will always feel some measure of regret. Her feeling of closeness to Israel informed her career as an early childhood teacher at Jewish institutions, and was reflected in her charitable giving. In conversation, it did not take much to remind Sue of songs she taught in the classroom, and she would spontaneously begin to sing whatever song the conversation brought to mind. She made a very large contribution over the course of 5 years to the Jewish National Fund in memory of Jay, a gift that is acknowledged in Jerusalem's Liberty Park. Discussions about Israel moved Sue to tears of concern. Just as news of births and engagements among the Chevra at the University Boulevard Shul moved her to tears of happiness. The Heavenly Court is surely aware of the large number of guests who enjoyed delicious and more than ample Shabbat and holiday meals at the Stern home. Everyone at University Boulevard considered Sue a friend. It takes more than a eulogy to fully express the complexity of someone's life and the enormity of the loss we have suffered. Brief remarks are never sufficient to describe the disappointments and achievements experienced over the course of 95 years. However, there is no reason to limit our discussions in coming days in order to fill out the story of this Eishes Chayil we were fortunate to have among us. This is a time of profound sadness and mourning for the Stern family, young Shomrai Emunah, and all the youngsters Sue taught, youngsters who on hopes are still singing her songs. May Sarah Bas Pesach Lev go in peace, and may she be a Melech Yosher for her family and for all who love her. Please rise for the memorial prayer. Yamolei Rachamim Shokein Bamaromim Amtzeim Nuknachona Kampei Ashkina Malos Kedoshim Utorim Zora Kia Masi Bim Es Nishmas Sarabas Pesach Leim Sholchal Yolama Bavur Shanach Spalal Yaras Karas Nishmasa Vigarei and Emunah Chasa Chemal Rachamim Yaski Brehab Seiser Knafav Liolamim Yitzror B'Torah Chayimas Nishmasa Adonai Nachlasa Sanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkava V'Nomar Amen. This concludes this portion of the service. We'll now escort Mrs. Stern outside to the hearse. The hearse will go slowly up to the top of the hill. We can follow by foot. And then at that point, those continuing out to Mount Lebanon Burial can get into cars and line up behind the hearse. Shiva this afternoon will be observed at the Stern home on Bivey until 5:30. And then after that, Judy Flax will be continuing to sit Shiva in Albany, and people can contact her by email. Okay, if the pallbearers would please come forward. Yoshi, say so. Yo, I used to know about the maps. So I have enough. Yatsil, we got the conclusion that Babos, Pepros, Yosef, Sachas, that said, Sinum so Hermi Tolo, Sibra, I can't believe what they think so. You never got what you got. Well, you got there, so wrong with it. I left, next all over.